Hey everybody, welcome to Liberty in EDC. I'm your host, Daniel Norman, and we are here with John Hidahl, and he's running for the District 1 Supervisor here in El Dorado County.
Yep.
So hey John, how's it going?
It's going well. Daniel, how are you doing tonight?
Not too bad.
Good, good.
Yeah. First thing I usually like to start out is, we want to know who are you? Who's John Hidahl?
So I am a 41-year resident of El Dorado Hills. We moved into our current house in 1978 and raised our 5 daughters there, all of which attended Oak Ridge High School, so I was very involved with a lot of the school activities in the early years. Got interested in helping the fire department, so I ran for the board of directors of the El Dorado Hills Fire Department back in like 1983. Got elected and served 31 years as an elected official in their 4-year term, so I was actually elected to 8 terms, but one of them was a 3-year term because it was a realignment trying to get in the off season, so that was kind of a peculiarity.
Oh, okay.
But I worked at Aerojet for 31 years in my career, did a lot of engineering activities, rocket science, that sort of thing. Moved over to Northrop Grumman for 10 years and worked primarily in signal intelligence.
Now, what's that?
Well, signal intelligence is data gathering of all of the signal communications of interest to the national defense. So there's several different platforms I worked on. The one I can talk about is the Global Hawk. That's an unmanned air vehicle, so it's pilotless, but basically will fly 30 hours of missions, loiter at high altitudes, and what they basically do is fly high enough that they're above any ground-to-air missile contacts and stuff, but they can acquire a lot of signal intelligence, signals that are being broadcast in various areas. So it's gathering that signal data, communications data, to try to better understand what kind of activities other people have, whether it be a known threat to the United States or other countries or agencies, but it's collecting all that data. And so a lot of that information ends up hitting the president's desk in terms of his daily security briefings and that sort of thing to let him know what's going on in the world. And so I was really proud to be able to contribute to that. But that was kind of the way I ended the career the last 10 years.
Yeah. No, that's overseas, right? Not U.S. citizens?
Right. So, it's overseas. It's nothing here. But it's interesting that Global Hawk's operational center is at Beale Air Force Base in terms of the launch. So it all is operated remotely, and the pilots come in and they dress up in their pilot gear because that way they get pilot's pay, I guess. And they fly the joysticks and they get the aircraft off the ground, and they hand it off to another Air Force base, and it does the actual flyovers and data reconnaissance and stuff, and then they bring it back and it's another handoff, and then they land it at Beale and unload all the data. And so it's a regular activity, and last time I knew there was 14 operating Global Hawk aircraft that were flying different parts of the world and collecting all that data, and most of them operating right out of Beale Air Force Base. So
wow.
Kind of cool. And Beale obviously is in Northern California, so it's very close to all the activities.
Now, how big are one of those?
The length of the aircraft is in the neighborhood of about 80 feet, but the wingspan is more like 100 feet.
Wow.
So, I mean, because they're a glider, basically. They get to very high altitude, and they basically use very little fuel, gliding at the very high altitudes and stuff. It still takes a significant amount of propulsion. But our part of it was strictly the signal intelligence acquisition system that loads into the aircraft, but they also have a lot of camera systems, imaging systems and that sort of thing. So they're taking pictures and images of things that are going on while we're actually collecting the signal intelligence data. So it's a multi-application type platform that they fly, but interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Now, so you're running for the District 1 Supervisor.
Yep.
So what does a supervisor do exactly?
Well, the main thing that supervisors are responsible for is decision-making on various aspects of how El Dorado County conducts its business, right? So one of the major ones that's always contentious is land use, because although the major decisions relative to general plan amendments, rezones, sometimes it's specific projects that are specific plan oriented, all those final decisions come to the Board of Supervisors. It goes through a public hearing process with the Planning Commission first, and the Planning Commission is advisory to the board on most items. There's some items that are relatively ministerial in nature, which the Planning Commission can approve without coming to the board, but that's it's really determined by the type of change that's being proposed.
Yeah.
But so decision making, and the other part is the fiduciary responsibility. How we control the money. What is the revenue stream? What are the expenditures? How do you make sure you don't end up with a deficit budget? Making sure we have a structurally balanced budget, and then monitoring the expenditures and trying to make sure that everything is spent wisely from the standpoint of we have limited resources. You're trying to always optimize how those resources are expended, the time frames, et cetera, and monitoring the actual costs associated with projects, because occasionally you do end up with cost overruns. That's just part of the business. You have an engineering estimate, you think you have a pretty good understanding of it, but then when they start doing excavating or something or other for a roadway, they find, okay, there's a lot of huge boulders in the area, and we have to come in and do dynamiting or something or other. Well, those kinds of things are typically planned if you know by doing core samples you have to do it, but sometimes you just get surprised.
Yeah.
Because you can't do everything, right? So you go out and you do a few samples and you say, okay, this looks pretty good. You put the estimate together, you get a bid, but the contractor always kind of caveats his work with some unknown defects or something like that, right? A clause that says, hey, if we come across something that's not expected, then understand that you're going to get a change order and we're going to process that. So those are the two major pieces of it. Decision making on a lot of different areas, but land use is one of the more difficult ones that we deal with, and then the financial responsibility to make sure that things are operating consistent with the day-to-day plans and the budgets. The other part is working with the CAO and making sure that as the Chief Administrative Officer, he's getting the input from the board that he needs to be able to direct the staff, the appointed department heads, keep them together in terms of the synergy. And one of the major pieces that we have is our strategic plan. The strategic plan that was developed by the board about 3.5 years ago has 5 different elements to it, and we try to relate to those 5 elements whenever we're approving something in the budget. What does it go against? Does it go against infrastructure? Does it go against public safety? Does it go against good governance in terms of it's a policy change? Does it address healthy communities, what we're trying to do with respect to making sure that we have good medical treatment, mental illness capabilities in terms of treating the mentally ill as well as the physically disabled, that sort of thing. And then the last one is economic development. It was just the 5th one of how do we make sure that we have a growing economy from the standpoint of being able to bring good jobs into El Dorado County, and make sure that those good jobs are available to the local youth and people who are just trying to get a better paying job than what they may have now. So some of that goes along with training, and we have training programs that we try to implement in conjunction with the school districts to make sure people have an opportunity to really get some vocational type training and then be able to get a job in El Dorado County. The toughest thing with that is finding affordable housing, because wherever you have, say, a company of 100 people move in, you're going to have various levels of salary, right? Salary and benefits. So you have the executives, which we have a lot of homes that are available to the executives, but then you take the lower rungs of the employment, the people that are doing more of the janitorial services and above, the people that are working the assistant levels, the secretarial type positions, that sort of thing, which make maybe, 20% of what the salary is of the CEO, so big. So how do you provide the housing available for those types of wage earners without having to have them commute for 20 miles and stuff? So that's one of the difficulties we have in El Dorado County, is we just don't have enough affordable housing. And a subcategory that's called workforce housing, which really provides that level where somebody who's making $40,000 a year can afford to live in a reasonable home for rent. If they're making $25,000 a year, they can live in an apartment that's fairly nice and stuff, and make sure they can pay their rent on that. So that's one of the struggles we really have, is trying to make sure that the housing, there's a diversity of housing available for people of all incomes. And tough to do when land values are real high, and then there's always the issue of where are you going to put it, because there's a lot of people that don't want anything that's a lower valued improvement than what their house is, because they figure it devalues their property. Right. So nobody wants a multi-family apartment complex right next to their single family dwelling. Yeah. And you understand those things. But one of the things that we're trying to change is some of the policies to require a little bit more separation between those kinds of distinctly different, a 3-story apartment complex versus a single family home. There needs to be some buffering in between. There needs to be some separation or something, so that you don't have them right up against one another. And El Dorado County's not really done a good job of that. We have property that's commercial in the business park, the south end of the business park, that's right up against residential. And that creates a lot of friction because some of the business park operations are manufacturing operations, and so there's noise and
Right.
there's paint booths and that sort of thing. And yet, so the residents on the other side of the fence essentially are all upset because of the noise factors and what are the environmental aspects of it. What am I breathing? And so that compatibility is always an issue. And again, we didn't do a good job of creating some buffering there. So we have some of the situations we try to deal with them as they come up, but as we're more and more aware of that, we try to change our policies to allow additional planning elements that would create or require buffers, some separation of some kind.
Yeah.
So we've gotten better at it. But,
Yeah, I know like the Safeway here in Placerville,
Yep.
like if you go behind that, it's like houses like all along there.
Right,
Yeah, I'm sure
exactly.
they're not crazy about that Safeway being there.
No, and normally, the provision you try to do is you have a commercial center and then you have a multifamily area behind that, and then you have the single family behind that. But you do it with separation of either elevations or fences or something that allows you to physically put some distance between those types of uses.
Yeah.
So they're not right butted up on this. So somebody's backyard, the back part of the back fence is right up against where the dumpster comes in and picks up the trash every Monday morning at 4 a.m. and wakes everybody up in the house of the residents next door to it. So, and there's a lot of things like that I think we're trying to make changes in that improve the quality of life of people who are in those kind of situations. But what's existing is tough to change. It's just you can only do better in the planning for the future. So.
Yeah. So why do you think that's been such an issue in El Dorado County, just kind of figuring out where where we're going to put new improvements and stuff?
A big part of it is El Dorado County likes to have the reputation of being a rural county. And rural generally implies minimum growth, minimum changes, because if you start bringing more population in, then it adds to the traffic levels, it adds to the noise. The environmental aspects of things can be more difficult. So there's a lot of things that happen when you bring in additional homes, additional people. And a lot of the people who've lived in El Dorado County for a long time, really like the separation they have without the interference of other activities. So it's difficult because there's a lot of challenges in terms of where do you place these. The state of California is putting more and more emphasis on things like where you have a transit center, putting multifamily housing next to a transit center, which makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of the logistics, getting people out of their cars. If you're close to a transit center, and you're living in an apartment,
less traffic.
Yeah, exactly. You can get the bus and drive to work. Basically have the bus take you to work, as opposed to get in your car and drive many miles to work or something of that nature. So there's some good aspects of it, but some of the recent legislation, what they call SB 50, it was just turned down by 3 votes. It was an 18 to 15 vote, and they needed 21 to pass. But that would have forced local entities, including El Dorado County, to accept projects without doing full environmental impact because they were multifamily units being built close to a transit center. Wow. So
that's something pretty much everyone's we've had come in here, for this election coming up. That's something they've been bringing up, and so I didn't hear that, so that they ended up not passing.
It ended up not passing. The vote was 2 days ago, I believe it was. So.
Wow.
And there was a lot of people disappointed because they think, how are we going to solve the housing crisis of inadequate housing if we don't force some of these things? And it didn't get the votes to force it. And I'm a very strong proponent of local control. The local community should be able to determine what they want and how it's placed and stuff within reason.
Yeah,
but
amen, man.
Whenever you're saying no to everything that's proposed, that's multifamily housing, for instance, so that doesn't work well because at some point you're not achieving the numbers that were provided to you through RENA, and our attainment in El Dorado County is about 50%.
What's that, RENA?
RENA is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and so every 5 years the county has to update their planning. It's part of the general plan, and there's a portion of the general plan called the housing element.
Oh, no, that's part of El Dorado County, or is that larger?
El Dorado County. El Dorado County's general plan.
Okay.
So every 5 years, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, which is a coalition of, I think it's like 8 cities and 5 counties or something or other, that is a regional area basically. And so the state provides allocations of what kind of housing should be built within that region area, the SACOG region. And then SACOG goes through and looks at what the growth rate has been in various portions of it, and then does a sub-allocation for the region down to individual entities. So El Dorado County is one, the city of Folsom is one, for instance, et cetera. So once you have those RENA numbers, it's requirement of state law to be able to identify properties that can be used for those kinds of applications. So if it's low income or very low income multifamily housing, you have to be able to show that there is an inventory of properties that are zoned for multifamily housing that will provide that housing.
Right.
And in the past, the state has never required the housing to be built. You just have to have a plan to say you could do it.
Oh, right.
They're now turning the corner and saying, well, that didn't work. So we need to have each of the entities really show us that they're going to build the houses, the multifamily apartments, whatever it is, as opposed to just planning for it. So, and there's been threats by the governor of punitive actions of withholding road fund monies for doing repaving, maintenance of roadways. So the state has a lot of power and influence over the counties that makes it very difficult to just ignore them. There's a lawsuit against the city of Huntington Beach exactly for that, for not meeting their RENA numbers and basically kind of saying, state of California, we're not going to pay any attention to what you're doing, and so the state's suing them. And for El Dorado County to get sued by the state would be devastating because we don't have the resources to take on something like that, and you just get, it's not a good situation. So we're always trying to balance that. What is it that they're telling us we need to do, and how do we do the best job we can to maintain local control, but yet really build some affordable housing.
Right.
And it's a struggle. There's some new projects coming down the line. They're relatively small, but if you have some small successes, then hopefully it can grow to be something a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I mean, so it's definitely a complicated problem.
Right.
But I mean, what is a short answer? What do you think a solution for that is?
Well, there's two major things that can happen. There's a lot of contractors who specialize in just affordable housing. And they work with the federal government to get money out of HUD. They work with the state government to get monies. And they work with the local entities to try to make sure that whatever local funds are available can be applied. So the local entities, the state, the city, or the county or the city, can apply for grant money sometimes and apply that to affordable housing. The other thing the local government can do is establish waivers of fees, fee waivers. So for instance, El Dorado County has a fee waiver program for multifamily housing, and it's a reimbursement really. The person who's proposing to put in a multifamily, it has to be a qualifying, multifamily resident or structure, so the rents can't be over a certain level, et cetera.
Gotcha.
But if they meet that criteria and they build the project, then they apply for a refund of the fees they paid up front, and they're refunded those fees. So the fee offset makes it more affordable to build the project. And then when you say you've got federal monies and state monies, that combination of those three things working together means that you can get to a more affordable piece of property for people, and that's what that kind of takes. The other aspect of it that we haven't invoked in El Dorado County, but we're seriously considering, is what they call inclusionary housing.
What's that?
Inclusionary housing means that for any subdivision, say you have a subdivision of 200 units that they're planning, if you have a policy that says 10% of those 200 units have to be dedicated to affordable housing provisions, then you can establish deed restrictions associated with those 20 units. And the idea, if it's done right, is when you drive through the neighborhood, all of the units look the same, right? So it doesn't look like here's the cheap little one-story they've stuck in here for affordable housing, and here's the two-story with all the gingerbread.
Gotcha.
So they have to look relatively uniform and stuff, but the way they do that then is there's a deed restriction on that affordable housing unit so that the individual who purchases that does not get the full equity growth out of it. They get some portion of the equity growth, but it's very limited. So they can't buy a house at 40% under market and turn around and sell it at market price.
Right.
Whenever it sells.
Yeah, they're not rating on the rest of the community's coattails.
They get some portion of the equity growth, as I understand it, but they don't get the full amount. Because
how do they control that?
It's all part of the real estate transaction. It happens when you do a sale, and I'm not familiar with the details of it because, again, we don't do it in El Dorado County, but we have looked at other areas where inclusionary housing has been imposed, and some of them have been successful and some of them have not. So you really want to make sure you have the right criteria associated with inclusionary housing to make it work effectively. So we're still trying to look at that, but that's one way. If you have a subdivision where the houses are selling for $500,000 typically, you can get 10% of those. So if you had 200 units you're building, 20 of those units would be affordable housing units. And instead of having a purchase price of $500,000, I don't know, they might be $300,000 or something or other, again with the deed restriction. So there's a number of things we can do. Those are probably the two major ones. But ultimately, the toughest challenge is to work with the community and get them to understand that we have to distribute more affordable housing, more workforce housing in many different areas to really meet the needs. And the workforce housing needs to be close to work centers.
Do you need excavating and trenching? All Good can handle it. Do you need brush and land clearing? All Good can handle it. Locally owned and operated for over 40 years, you'll be in good hands. For all your excavating and demo needs, give us a call. 530-344-3417. 530-344-3417.
And the workforce housing needs to be close to work centers. So we're not talking about the very remote rural parts of the county or anything. It has to be basically our community regions, because the general plan kind of defines three basic areas: the community region, which is where they anticipate the growth, and that's basically anything in the El Dorado Hills area or along Highway 50 up to Shingle Springs. We have maps. And then South Lake Tahoe is a community region as well. So we have maps that define the community regions. And outside of that, you have generally rural region, which a lot of those are 5-acre minimum parcels or 20 acres, RE10, agricultural units, that kind of stuff. And then you have what they call a rural center. And a rural center is where you have an area that's got some businesses that are built up, but it's in a rural part of the county. So it's not a full service type of community environment, but you got a gas station, you got a mini mart, you got a laundromat, you got something there that provides the local services, but not to the extent it would be if you were in a more cosmopolitan, downtown type of area somewhere. Downtown.
I don't know if this would count, but immediately what I think of is when you're going down and there's like the El Dorado Saloon over there, and I think like a Safeway, and it just feels, it's kind of like it's a little ways out there, but there's amenities there,
absolutely,
and stuff. Would that be considered one of those?
It could be.
There's a good amount of stuff there too.
Right, and there is apartments right behind where the Safeway is. I don't know if you ever noticed those or not, but if you continue down Francisco Drive, there is a series of apartments there that were built probably 25 years ago, something like that. They were part of what was called the Northwest Specific Plan, El Dorado Hills Northwest Specific Plan. So they planned the apartments, they planned single-family residential, they planned the commercial center. And actually the way that was done was reasonably well, because the commercial center is across one side of the street, and then the apartments on the other side of the street, and then when you get beyond the apartments, you get into single-family residential. So again, it's got that separation and the buffering, because the street will make the separation, basically. You get a little distance between where the commercial is and the multifamily is, and yet it's close enough that people who live in those apartments can walk across the street and access everything that's at the Safeway Center, and even on the other side of the street where the pizza place and the Mexican restaurant and all those kinds of places are. So it makes it available for people to walk or to ride a bicycle, without having to get in a car to go and get basic services. And so those kinds of things are beneficial from a standpoint of air quality, because when you're not starting up automobiles and driving around, the air quality stays better. And I think from a physical, healthy communities perspective, it's better to encourage people to get out and walk more. And ride a bicycle if you have a bicycle, or skateboard, or whatever it is, right? But just not jump in the car every time you have to run somewhere, and even if it's a quarter of a mile away. So but that's the kind of thing we're looking at.
Cool. Now, why do you think in El Dorado County, like just the natural market hasn't provided enough affordable housing for us?
The trend for growth in El Dorado County has been market rate housing. Because the contractors, the developers who've come in are typically saying what kind of home has the best marketing ability from the standpoint of, it's going to have a high cost, got the land value to start with, and you got to do grading, you got to do the infrastructure, put in the roads, put in the water, put in the sewer systems, put in all that stuff, and then you build a house. And so they always look at what is the market niche where we can build something here that will attract people. So if you look at Serrano as an example, Serrano is a community that was really based upon upper end type of housing. And particularly if we get by a golf course. I mean, some of those homes up there are just absolutely gorgeous. And so, and you can understand the attraction of that for people who are retired and want to move to an area that has less traffic. So we get a lot of migration from the Bay Area and Southern California moving to El Dorado Hills in particular because of the amenities between Town Center, Serrano, and various other communities that are there. There's a big attraction. But within the 4 categories of RHNA, the lowest one is called very low income, and we have an allocation for that. The next one's called low income. Then there's a moderate income, then there's an above moderate income. And we always meet the above moderate income numbers because that's anything, trying to get it, anything above like, what is it? It's like $400,000 for a family of 4, I think it is above moderate. Okay, so we have a lot of housing that gets built at that price range.
Yeah.
But we have almost none that gets built at the very low income unless it's multifamily apartments or something or other, and those are few and far between. So of the allocations we were given 5 years ago, we're at about 50% attainment of actually building property against those allocations.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the state is going to continue to allow that kind of a gap, or if they're going to say, well, you guys need to step up your game and close it down. That's the inference I'm getting from what the governor is saying and a lot of things else, other things going on. But you just don't know. But the other statistic I think is important to note is we just had a consultant do a study, so I believe there's some validity in it as opposed to somebody's guess.
Yeah.
But what they told us was that 85% of the growth that's happened in El Dorado County in the last 5 years has happened in El Dorado Hills. So it's been District 1 and District 2, and the district boundaries are a little peculiar, but basically District 1, it goes halfway through the business park and on the north side, and District 2 is halfway through the business park on the south side, although Blackstone and Montana de Oro, those are District 2. So it's kind of a strange thing, but all of the more recently built, not multifamily, but age-restricted senior housing that Lennar builds typically, all of that is in District 2.
Oh, okay.
So we've had about equal growth over the last 5 years between District 1 and District 2 because of the large number of age-restricted units that have been built south of Highway 50 there. But we have a provision in the general plan that says ideally we have 75% of the growth in the community regions and 25% of the growth in the rural regions. So that was the target that was established, and there's nothing magic about it. But when you look at 85% of the growth was totally within El Dorado Hills, or 85%, as opposed to 75% for the whole community region, we're obviously building a lot more homes in El Dorado Hills than we are the rest of the county. Different than what was forecast in the general plan.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, do we need to go back and modify the general plan to be more consistent with what our attainment is, what we're really doing? Or do we really need to look at what do we need to do to encourage a distribution consistent with the general plan?
Yeah.
So you have to weigh all those things, and one of the things that's coming up, because we've recognized that there are going to be a lot of land use projects that come before the board probably over the next 2 to 3 years, is that we're going to have a special workshop here in February with the board and the public, so that the public's invited to really talk about what are the appropriate methods of addressing some of the land use issues that we have, and talk about the RHNA things, and what do we think we need to do, and how do we essentially achieve it from the standpoint of having community meetings and stuff, and trying to pick areas where we can build that workforce housing, the affordable housing, with the least impact to the community. It's always going to have an impact. There's always going to be traffic and other things, but how do we do the proper mitigation of the roadways? Whether that's expanding the roadway, whether it's putting in turn lanes, whether it's putting shoulders on a roadway that's never had shoulders for emergency, evacuations, getting off the roadway with an emergency type of thing. You get a flat tire and there's no shoulder on the road, what are you going to do? You keep running on the rim until you find a place you can pull off, right? And that's not good on your rim or anything else. And if you got to run a half a mile, so there's an awful lot of roadways in El Dorado County that do not have proper shoulders. They're not even proper width. So one of the things I've found is that with respect to roads, El Dorado County accepted a lot of roads that were built by private investors or a developer in a given area, and they accept them as a county maintained road, yet they didn't meet the county standards. The county standard is you have to have at least a 15-foot roadway, and some of these are 12-foot with no shoulder. And so then as the traffic builds up and people are driving higher powered automobiles and they're driving faster all the time, then you end up with accidents, and particularly if you have inclement weather, icy areas or something rather on a turn, and so there have been a lot more fatalities in El Dorado County as a result of some of those things. We kind of follow the CHP statistics, but if you don't have a way to do an accident avoidance maneuver, somebody's coming at you and they're distracted and they're not watching, they're coming across in your lane. If you can pull over on the shoulder a little bit and avoid being hit, that's one thing. But if the choice is the ditch or somebody coming at you head on, that's a personal choice, right? And if that ditch happens to be a big drop off, I'm not sure what you do. The last thing you want to do is a head on impact. But
yeah, I mean, I grew up out in Swansboro and on Rock Creek Roadside.
Yep.
And so, it's someone comes around, on the wrong side of the road on one of those blind turns, and it's like, you're not going anywhere. It's hundreds of feet down to the river.
I just talked to a gentleman up in Mosquito, and he was talking about some of the issues up there and people passing on blind curves and kind of like, wow. And some of those, the edge of the roadway, there's not only no shoulder, but it's a just down slope canyon.
Yeah.
That if you get about 3 feet off that roadway, your car is going down probably 150, 200 feet before it's going to stop somewhere. Now, that's not a good scenario if you think you're going to try to survive something like that. So, but people always seem to be in such a big hurry these days. I mean, and the cars are better, and I think there's a false sense of security because with the airbags that we have now, and the seatbelt protections, and all the way the automobiles are built to take an impact without doing as much damage to the driver and the passengers and stuff as they were in the past. I think people have a false sense of security that they sometimes they think they don't even need to put the seatbelts on. That's one of the things the CHP is continually telling us is, we had so many fatalities, and unfortunately about 60% of those fatalities were for individuals that didn't have their seatbelts on.
Wow. And that's for El Dorado County?
For El Dorado County.
Oh, wow.
And so they're thinking, I guess, that the airbags are going to take care of them somehow, but the airbag was never meant to keep you in your seat and not go through the windshield. It's going to help, but it's meant to cushion you when you roll forward and take that impact against the steering wheel and buffer you against the steering wheel. But if you're not in the seatbelt, you'll go forward and then you'll launch through the front of the window. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that have changed from a standpoint of technology, and I think people just have a false sense of security a lot of times until, there is a major accident or something and they see it firsthand. And then maybe it makes an impression on them. But so there's a lot of things. But road maintenance, trying to determine how we get enough funds for road maintenance is a big issue. The state of California used to provide reasonable amounts of money to do road maintenance, because when you really look at maintaining roads, not the capital improvements for growth, but maintaining roads, the state of California is collecting gas tax and other fees that they send back to the counties and the cities for road maintenance. The thing that we found in the last 10 years is that the state has consistently reduced the amount of money that's coming back to the counties, and they've made it much more difficult to apply for grants and get grants to do road maintenance or even road improvements, because what their motivation is they want to get you out of the car, they want to get you on transit, they want to get you on a bicycle, they want to get you walking. So there's a substantial amount of grant monies available for things like bike paths and sidewalks and that sort of thing, because they want to get you out of the car, but not enough to maintain the roads or to widen the road. So that's all shifted over really the last 10 years. And so our Director of Transportation has put together some pretty good histograms that show what's happened. And then the biggest disappointment was SB 1, Senate Bill 1, that was recently passed, because
which one was that?
This is the new gas tax that was applied to both gasoline and diesel. So the state of California is going to collect more money to be able to help Caltrans do a better job of maintaining our highways and freeways, but a significant part of it was going to go to counties and cities. So there was original allocations.
Yeah. Well, I think California is rated in the top 10 for worst roadways in the nation.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, our education is in that similar kind of boundary. So we have the 5th largest economy in the world in the state of California, yet we can't maintain our infrastructure. And then we have a huge homeless problem on top of it. So
it's a miracle we're still here.
We're not getting everything right. So there's some things that we need to try to do in that regard. And that's, in addition to housing, the homelessness situation is the other thing I think we really have to address, because we've seen growing numbers in a number of different surveys that have been done, the point in time counts that were done to satisfy HUD requirements to get federal funding for housing. And there's a theme that goes along with that housing for the homeless is you need to have a housing first look at things, which means you can only shelter people and give them educational backgrounds and give them a hand up and get them started in life again if there's a more permanent, I won't say permanent, but more permanent form of housing available that they can move into. So a lot of the programs that we've seen successful in various areas, in fact, I'm initiating a field trip with a number of different people. My office is coordinating with a local group to go up to Marysville and basically do a site tour of their facility, which is called 14 Forward. And so what they have is, I think it's 14 tough sheds that have been built, and they've equipped them, for sleeping overnight and that sort of thing. Then they have a central bathroom area and they brought in, but they've also brought services in. So they have right on the site the ability to get people registered for whatever types of Health and Human Services funding they can get if they're a veteran. There may be veteran payments, VA bill payments and stuff that they can get. There may be Medi-Cal type benefits they can get for their personal health aspects of things. But you have to apply for all those things. And for somebody who's homeless and in a more rural area out in the woods or something or other, they're never going to know about that, nor are they going to be able to access the service centers, which are on a Brew Road area for Health and Human Services primarily, to be able to go in and get those services. So by having this 14 Forward type of system, it allows you to do that. Our sheriff is doing a great job, and the HOT team, because they've recently equipped things with a trailer that we can bring things to the homeless and get that kind of thing done without having the tough shed part of it. But again, without some form of temporary housing and then a more permanent form of housing, housing first, it makes it extremely difficult to help people, get them the proper attention, and then make sure it's not something that's a giveaway, that's not an entitlement, but encourage them to every part you have to be have a purposeful life and get their feet back on the ground.
Yeah. So we had the sheriff in here not too long ago.
Good.
And we were talking about just this issue.
Yeah.
And you keep saying housing first. And for the sheriff, he kept hitting the point of we can't just have housing first.
Yeah,
like, I guess more of a housing concurrent. Whereas we have housing, but it has to be hand in hand with.
We disagree on a number of things relative to the homeless.
But
that's
so
one of,
I mean, yeah. So what's kind of your take on that?
Every study that's been done that I know of ultimately concludes that housing first is a big part of it, because you have to have a place that people can recoup, basically, that they get the initial housing that's provided by some kind of a shelter. There's an assessment that's done, and I kind of put the homeless into 4 categories. There's those who have just fallen on hard times, and they're the easiest ones to give a hand up and give them some vocational training, give them a skill set that they can go out and get a decent job, give them a way to get from where they live to where they need to work, because that's a big problem with a lot of the homeless. If they don't have a car, how do you maintain a job if somebody has, a buddy has to drive you to work all the time?
Yeah, especially in El Dorado County.
Exactly.
A lot of stuff spread out.
Right. So that's a big part of it. But you start with those people who've just fallen on hard luck, and those are the easiest ones, I think, to get into a more permanent thing. And they're the ones that I think the housing first is a big important step, because you kind of do some triage, you get them on the right path. You set their life up and stuff and establish a purpose to what they're trying to do, and then you can move them into that more permanent housing. On the other end of this extreme is those that are called chronic homeless. And those are the people that, because of their desire not to be in a confined space with somebody, not to have a lot of people around them, whether it's a PTSD-driven thing, whether it's fear of whatever, they just want to be by themselves or in a community of like people. In the woods or on the street or wherever it is, and unfortunately, for the most part, I don't think they will ever convert to be, people that you can bring into housing and it'll be stable. It's always going to be a difficult thing to try to accomplish that, short of maybe a commune type of system where you have people that come together that really help one another. And so those that are more able help those that are less able, but they create community and they create relationships and they create a purpose in life when you do that. So there have been several of examples of facilities that basically are like a commune for the homeless, but they've been very successful because it puts purpose back in people's lives to help one another, as opposed to I'm just all by myself, woe is me, nobody loves me, nobody cares about me, all those kinds of things. So the chronic is the one end, the people who just fall on hard luck is the other end, and then the two in the middle are somewhat crossovers, and that is those that suffer from mental illness. And that can be a naturally occurring mental illness of some kind. And then those that are subject to substance abuse. But what you find is there's a lot of crossover, because those who have mental illness self-medicate with drugs, because they don't like the pain and whatever it is and stuff. And you also find that sometimes if you use too many drugs, it creates mental illness.
Right.
So one can be the cause of the other, and it's not always easy to assess somebody and say, okay, they're 90% mental health, mental illness issue, and this is what they're suffering from, and this is the proper treatment, versus the 10% substance abuse. Sometimes it's just very difficult to do that. But where you have those two middle pieces, we have services available to try to help people. Unfortunately, not enough, because the state controls a lot of the mental health things. If you look at when we had state hospitals, the state of California, and they went away, and basically what the state was saying is we're going to make that a local responsibility. So they passed that down to the counties and the cities to be responsible for working with the local hospitals and that sort of thing and trying to deal with it. So we have a PUF facility, which is a psychiatric health facility, where if you have psychiatric assessment done and you need to be housed in the PUF facility, that allows that to occur while people go through a rehabilitation and stuff, and then they're released at some point after they're felt to be that they've made a partial recovery or full recovery or whatever it is. But we do not have a mental health facility per se.
Right.
And so we struggle as a county to try to determine if that's something we need to move towards, or whether it's better to work with another county and basically buy bed space in a mental health facility.
Right, yeah, because I mean, our hospital isn't equipped for that.
Exactly. So Marshall Hospital just doesn't have the capacity to do all those things. I think they're doing the best they can, and I think they're actually getting better at what they're able to do. But again, they have limitations on what they can do, because obviously it's a for-profit type of entity, and they can't just treat people like they can. Sometimes the county hospitals, the county just has to bear the burden of whatever those costs are. But the state has gotten out of that way too much, in my opinion, and I think with the current governor's talk, maybe there'll be some action to try to reevaluate how many state mental health facilities really need to be in operation to deal with the really chronically mentally ill people, so that they're not a threat to themselves or anybody else in society. So, but those are always tough things to figure out who's going to pay for it, because, it's it costs a lot of money. I mean, one of the things number that I heard was the person in Sacramento County who had the most calls to the hospitals and stuff was costing the Sacramento County like $250,000 a year for this person to go back and forth to the hospital. That type of thing. So the cost of coverage is incredible if people aren't able to maintain good health. And once they start that slide, their immune system becomes compromised, and they get all kinds of infections and disease, and they're not able to treat it. And then you're talking about having to use various drugs and stuff to try to combat that. It's very, very expensive to do those things. It's better if you can find the housing first thing and get somebody stabilized in that, and then move on. So, there's a lot of difference of opinion on it, and we actually have a coalition now that's working to try to determine what's right for El Dorado County and the city of Placerville. So, City of Placerville and El Dorado County have talked quite a bit about what do we need to do to try to address the homeless needs, and how do we provide facilities and care and that sort of thing. And the HOT team is actually one of the members of the HOT team now is a member of the Placerville Police Department. So they're working hand in hand together, and I think that's made a big improvement, because in the past people felt that the police department was kind of kicking all the homeless out, and then the sheriff would go out and try to find a place for them to stay, and it was a more compassionate, kinder type of response. But they weren't working well together, and so now I think they're working better together. But there's still a lot of challenges there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff to work on.
Right.
For sure. Now, so for a district supervisor, what makes you qualified?
Okay, 33 years of experience on the Elder Hills Fire Department, so I'm very familiar with what it is to be an elected official. The Brown Act, which is one of the driving criteria of how you have to provide proper agendizing of items, how you have to make it available to the public in terms of information available 72 hours before the actual meeting to understand what's out there. So a lot of the stuff that gets into Brown Act provisions and stuff I'm very familiar with, having been elected official for a long time. And it's really, it's all said and done, I'm retired. I retired after, like I said, 41 years in aerospace.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, the retirement felt good. That was in 2014. But I really want to give back to the community and continue to give back because I've been involved with a lot of voluntary services. I served in various capacities with our Elder Hills Community Services District on task force, and right now I'm on the CCNR advisory committee. And I've been involved with a lot of other activities we did in corporation. We did a look at incorporation for Eldorado Hills in 2004, got on the ballot 2005, and I was the Eldorado Hills Incorporation chairman of the committee that brought that to a vote. And it was the third attempt that we had made. It actually started in 1999, and we finally got it to a vote in 2005. But unfortunately, there was a lot of money spent to make people believe that if you incorporate it, it's another layer of government. It's going to cost you a lot more money, and any city is going to try to increase your taxes. I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's a function of who you elect to be on your city council. It's like who you elect to be your county supervisor is going to determine, the future of the county and what decisions are made and how it moves. So it's not so much creating the city government, because we're actually going to consolidate the community services district into that city government. So we were eliminating one form of government, a special district, and basically bringing that in and making it part of the city's operation.
Yeah.
But it failed on a vote, and people have the right to voice their opinion how they want to do it. There's now new discussion about forming a city or town of Eldorado Hills.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too. Is El Dorado County, like the whole thing of being rural, and you hear city, and it's you know knee-jerk reaction to be scared of that.
Hi, I'm Rick Rowe, owner of Placerville Polaris and Power Tools. I've owned and operated Placerville Polaris since 2007. If you'd like to experience the off-road, or if you have property in our community, come on in. Let's see what we can build for you. We are your one-stop shop for off-road fun. We do it all, from building your dream toy to decking out your razor. We are complete with a full shop, and we proudly service all our products, including our power tools. We carry only the best top quality brands, and we have everything you need for taking care of your property and maintaining your 100-foot defensible fire space. Building off-road vehicles is a passion of mine that I take very seriously. I like to be personally involved in building your dream toy from start to finish. Here at Placerville Polaris, we do a lot of testing for the manufacturers to ensure you get the proper accessories to fit your specific needs. One of my favorite parts is test driving to maximize satisfaction and quality. Come on in. Let's see what we can build for you.
Contact Placerville Polaris at 530-622-9079 or 673 Placerville Drive or placervillepolaris.com.
A lot of people, I think, at the time it came to a vote, were new residents of Serrano. And they were coming from primarily Bay Area cities, but also Southern California. And so just the concept of a city gave them great concern, because that's what they moved away from, all that traffic and all this kind of stuff. And so it's interesting, because I was an advocate for using the term town, the town of Eldorado Hills, as opposed to the city. And both are acceptable by LAFCO's law. You can incorporate it as a town, you can incorporate it as a city. But if you think of things like the town of Truckee, it's got a woodsy, homey, very comfortable type of place, as opposed to a city, and you think of high-rise buildings and monstrous freeways. And you think of, like, there's still trees. Yeah, exactly. So a town is generally accepted as being a softer, more friendly type of environment as opposed to the city. So I actually was a proponent for calling it the town, but people felt, well, you'd be misleading people, and so whatever. But I still believe that if Eldorado Hills moves forward, they should seriously consider calling it the town of Eldorado Hills. Because Eldorado Hills started with the village concept, and it was intended to be a series of villages, and that's why some of the first villages were built. Park Village, St. Andrews Village, Ridgeview Village, various other ones were built with that village name, because when the Gruen Plan was put together in the 1960s, the idea was a village has its own services. It's kind of a self-centered operation, but it's a friendly community thing where you have local services available. Everybody knows one another. It's not your lot and block type of subdivision. And you design it around that as communities within a community, smaller communities within a larger community. And over time it's changed. Serrano kind of broke that paradigm for the most part, at least in my opinion, and other subdivisions that have gone in really didn't associate well with the village concept. But that was what was proposed, and it was what was approved. So we're kind of a mixture of things right now. But one of the things we just kicked off at the county level is a volunteer group that's looking at writing a set of design standards for El Dorado Hills. So we've actually got 3 of them going on. I know there's one in Cameron Park that's going on, and there's one in Shingle Springs that's been going on. And what that does is it's part of the general plan, but it says within the general plan you can design a community plan that basically is subservient to the general plan, but defines what is the community identity that you want. So if there's certain architectural themes that are important to you, if there's certain things that go along with height of buildings, width of buildings, that sort of thing. So we just had a session in El Dorado Hills with the volunteers who volunteered to be on the committee, and there was a question of what do you like about the various things you see in the community, the residential communities that you've been in, which do you like and which do you not like, and the same thing with the commercial. And so there are several good examples of things that people felt were, this is really an attractive thing, and that's typically the town center commercial.
Yeah.
When you go down and look at some of those, Montana de Oro, and the waterfalls was mentioned, a lot of different places, and then you got the residential, and some of the the Serrano features of the residential are very attractive to some people. So there's various things, and everybody's going to look at it a little bit differently because your personal eye, the things that you like in a neighborhood, are going to be different depending upon where you were raised and your lifestyle and what your ambition is and all those kinds of things. So it is somewhat subjective as to what you like and what you don't like, but a diversity of housing and properties and stuff is what I think the end result ends up being. You want a diversity of things, but you want them to be compatible.
Yeah.
So diversity that is compatible, and Town Center was brought up as an example of doing a pretty good job of that. Because there's a lot of different mixtures of color and texture and windows and everything else that gives you various European, at least in my opinion, European style buildings. And it almost looks like it's a mixed use where you would have housing above the shops that are down below. Well, a lot of them are actually business offices above as opposed to housing.
Yeah.
But you have the shops that are, the restaurants and the library, the bookstores, that kind of stuff. Actually, the library, bookstores are down below.
El Dorado Town Hills, the town center is beautiful.
Right,
yeah,
it is.
It looks nice.
And that was a dream by the Mansour Company that they put together for many, many years with a lot of domestic and international consultants to do it. And I thought they did a fantastic job of bringing that whole thing together because it is a major attraction.
Yeah.
And so it takes visionaries sometimes to come up with those things, because El Dorado Hills would be totally different if there wasn't a town center. If all it was housing, but didn't have that, then we'd even have more sales tax leakage that goes down to Folsom and Sacramento County because we don't have the local restaurants and shops.
Yeah.
We got a Target store, so that's sales tax revenue. But on the forefront, obviously, one of the things that I'm looking forward to is the decision on whether Costco is going to decide to build a new facility on Silver Valley Parkway and Highway 50. And they've indicated that they have a strong interest in that. Not sure if that's going to go forward or not, but if it does, then that would be an opportunity to start a series of hearings and the public can comment on it and those kinds of things. But if we were able to put in a Costco, our sales tax revenues in El Dorado County, which provides services, it's property tax and sales tax, would go up substantially from the standpoint of it's not all leaking over to Folsom now.
Yeah, that was the first thing when you were talking about the sale tax was, what would I go to out of county for? And that was the only thing I think of was, going down to Costco, one of those places.
Yep, it turns out when Costco did the survey, I think they said there are 35,000 Costco customers in El Dorado County, and those are built in. They're going to go to a Costco, right? Yeah. Right now, the majority of them are going to Folsom. There's probably a few that are going over towards the Auburn area. I'm sure there are a few in Tahoe that are going across the hill and going down to the Costco that's down in the valley there. I'm trying to think of what the name of the town is, but Minden, that area.
Okay.
But for the most part, people are driving from the rural parts of El Dorado County to go to Highway 50 to go to Costco in Folsom, buy their large commodity staples and that sort of thing, and then driving back home. I've heard of some people doing it once a week, some people once every 2 weeks, some people once a month, whatever it is. But there's a lot of traffic. It's the other part generated by doing that. But the primary thing is if we can keep sales tax in El Dorado County, then we can use it to our benefit to actually provide services. Because right now, we are feeding the city of Folsom's infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't get any real direct benefit. We've actually had conversations with the city of Folsom and said, hey, is there any way that you would be willing to share some of that sales tax revenue that goes to La Borgata and all the other stuff? And they said, thank you, no thank you. You know, they're in the seat of control basically, and so that's to be understood. I mean, it was half in jest that the question was raised, but sometimes if you don't ask, you never know, right? So, but that's one of the major things that I think is going to transition that part if Costco does come in, because that whole project is referred to as EDH 52, and there's a number of other commercial enterprises that are possible with that. At one time, they talked about a hotel being in that particular parcel. They talked about multiple gas stations. They talked a lot of service area stuff. They talked about some storage facilities. So we do know that Costco has a main interest in one segment of what's EDH 52, and that's kind of that segment between Silva Valley Parkway and the crossover roadway. Clarksville Crossing is what it's called. And so it's that wedge piece that's right off of Highway 50. So the back of the Costco, if it's built with what they're proposing right now, would go right up against the backside of Highway 50 to keep it as far away from the local school and the houses and stuff that are there, and yet be compatible for delivery of services or people coming down Highway 50. And I think it's going to be, one of those things that basically will offset a lot of the overload that's happening in the city of Folsom. But it's also going to be a major convenience factor for people in El Dorado Hills in particular, but other people not to have to go as far and have to fight the traffic to get down off of Bidwell and in and around that spot. Well, the other part is we're opening up a new road. Saratoga Way is going to be connected to Iron Point Road. That's part of the Saratoga Estates subdivision, so that's one of the things that we fought hard is to get the road improvement. We are very, very fortunate to have H.C. Elliott be the builder of that. And since
who's that?
H.C. Elliott. So they actually built a lot of the homes. They're Empire Ranch, just on the other side in Sacramento County.
Okay.
And they personally, pretty close, came to basically build out of that area. So this is their first project they've done in El Dorado County. But part of the nice thing about that is they want to continue the landscape median and the separation that they have on the Empire Ranch side when they come into El Dorado County all the way down Saratoga where Wilson hits it, which is where their subdivision is in that basically that intersection. So that's going to be a nice amenity, and it will blend the two communities. It's not going to look like you're going to go from the upscale Folsom with the landscape median to just a normal street in El Dorado County. You are actually going to cross over the county line with those improvements.
Have a little bit of separation.
Right. So, that's a major addition because I know that project was proposed like 20 years ago of connecting basically Saratoga Way to Folsom to give a parallel routing to Highway 50 so everybody doesn't have to load onto Highway 50. And the other advantage of this is it connects Wilson Way to Saratoga, which will be an intersection. So people who live in Ridgeview and the upper part of that community can come down and hit Wilson Way at Saratoga and go down to Folsom as opposed to having to come El Dorado Hills Boulevard, turn off on Saratoga Way. So there's going to be some significant improvements, I think, in terms of traffic flow as a result of it. Local traffic's going to increase. I mean, Saratoga Way is going to have more traffic on it. There's no doubt about it. But at least from the standpoint of convenience and time efficiency and getting back and forth between Folsom, and if there's a major accident, truck, tractor, rig, or whatever flips over on Highway 50 and it gets blocked off, I mean, we had one of those happen many years ago, and Green Valley Road was the only alternate parallel routing. There's nothing south of Highway 50 that you can use to get to Placerville from El Dorado Hills. So Green Valley Road provides that, right? And so all the traffic went over to Green Valley Road, and it was a nightmare. It was a holiday weekend, as I recall. It was just really difficult to try to get home, even on Green Valley Road. So that parallel routing is just one more parallel route. We'll be able to take Saratoga in lieu of Highway 50 plus Green Valley, because ultimately that's what you have to consider. There's always going to be something that's unexpected that's going to basically stall traffic for a long period of time, and if you don't have any backups or only one backup, then everything goes that direction. So it'll be, I think, a circulation improvement, and overall something that's been fulfilled after 20 years of planning. So.
Yeah. What's your why for you? Like, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be a public servant? Like, what's kind of like your personal why?
So one of the things that is part of my background is I grew up as a Boy Scout, and the Boy Scout teachings and stuff were very much, oriented.
How high did you get in Boy Scouts?
I'm an Eagle Scout.
Eagle Scout, okay.
So I got as far as Eagle,
Yeah.
but basically the Boy Scout motto is do good, turn daily, right? And there's various other things, honest, the oath of the Boy Scouts and stuff, where you basically learn that it's not about you that really matters. It's about helping other people, right? It's about taking care of yourself, but being willing to help other people. And so I grew up with that as part of my background through scouting and through various other things I did. So I've kind of adopted this provision that kind of my personal motto is service before self. And many years of volunteering and many years of activity like that. And I guess that I inherited from my father. My father was very much involved with a lot of different Lions clubs and social stuff, and he was part of this high school district where I grew up and stuff, and ultimately he has an elementary school named after him. So there's a Hidahl Elementary School in Ceres, California, and it's the Hidahl Huskies. And so we're really proud of that from a family perspective.
Yeah.
Our dad got recognized for all the hours of volunteer we were keeping in. He was actually on a fire department board of directors and stuff at the same time I was, so that was kind of interesting to talk about the different things that are going on. But I guess I grew up in that environment. With the scouting and everything else, it was always not self-centered focus, but what do you do to help others? But be prepared in what you're dealing with too. That's the other part of the Boy Scouts, and the be prepared part. It makes you think ahead. If I'm going to go do something, what do I need to have? If I'm going to go on a cross-country skiing trip, and it's in the middle of winter, obviously, what do I need to take? So I've got some provisions that I've got food and I've got water, and if I have to dig a snow cave, how do I do that? And all these kinds of things. So it's somewhat kind of a survival thing, but it isn't as extreme, obviously, as military survival training and thing. But it teaches the fundamentals of how to be prepared and how to be able to address and take care of things. So I carry a lot of tools with me. If somebody breaks down on the highway, I'm going to stop and see if I can help them somehow. And having a toolbox and stuff with you, it really just makes a difference sometimes. Somebody's trying to get a tire off a vehicle and they don't have the right tool to do it, and I carry that kind of tool with me to help other people. So it's just been a long history of wanting to help other people and giving back to the community. I've been very fortunate in my upbringing. I had great parents. I got a great education. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, graduated after 4 years in mechanical engineering, and then started with Aerojet and did the rocket science stuff and all that. So I've been extremely fortunate in all the things that have presented themselves in my life, and I think I've made a series of good choices. And when you get towards that period where you are retired, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not ready to just sit and be a couch potato, and I don't golf, and so how do I do things that keeps me active but yet allows me to engage in the community and feel like I'm contributing something and putting something back as opposed to just taking something. So it's just my personal motivation, and it comes from family background and other things, I think, primarily, and different people look at those things differently, but I've always kind of set myself back as secondary as opposed to trying to help other people.
That's great.
Yeah, well, I feel good about it. I mean, it really does make you feel like, okay, it does make a difference sometimes. And when you deal with people who have been in troubled situations, some of the homeless have had very troubled situations. And one of the statistics we heard recently that really bothered me is the two most rapidly growing areas in the homeless are females over 65 years of age.
Really?
And youth between the ages of 18 and like 25. And the females over 65 are generally because they don't have a spouse, they're on a fixed income, Social Security, whatever it is, and short of family stepping up and be able to take care of them. If there is no family, at some point on a fixed income, they can't pay the rent and pay the bills and pay the medical expenses and everything else.
Yeah.
And so now they become homeless. And then, so how do you deal with that? Which is why you have to have some of the housing first for the homeless.
Right.
Because it isn't just the person who some people would view as the drug addict that's affected by this.
Yeah.
There's a wide diversity of people affected by homelessness. There's a lot of youth that are homeless. And they're basically couch surfing from one place to another because they don't have a permanent home. And so they're living with friends or whatever, and they're moving around all the time. But that second group is largely driven, as I've found, by foster parenting, because when a foster child turns 18, there's no longer any resources associated with taking care of that foster child.
Yeah.
And so if they haven't been able to get a decent education, if they haven't been able to get a job and get started in some kind of a career, basically they're out on the streets and they're fending for themselves. And unfortunately, so many people that have gone through, you know, that being a foster child in foster homes, and a lot of them are really great, some of them not so great, they have they're bound to have some kind of trauma. You know, they've been abused in some form or fashion. Their parents were drug addicts when they were born, whatever it was, right?
Right.
So they have a history of having a very challenged life. Yeah. And then at 18, they're put out on the streets by themselves. And again, that's the kind of person, if they're not totally addicted to drugs and stuff, and even if they are, you need to try to deal with that. If they have a lot of PTSD or something because of the mental situation they've been given, they've been so abused that they're just beat, from the standpoint of
it's almost
purpose
being
in
like
life.
Told your whole life that you're unwanted.
Exactly.
And then you're
exactly
foisted out.
You're not worth a damn. Why were
Right.
you even born? Yeah, and then you're out on the street by yourself, and there's obviously a lot of abuse that happens when people move out in the street. And so again, that housing first thing provides sheltering and stability for some of those kinds of people. So it's not the right thing for everybody, but there's such a diversity of homeless. You really have to kind of break it down and understand the statistics. But that statistic I learned recently is very discouraging, because it says it's on both ends. The senior women, and then the youth who primarily have been through foster care and stuff, and their utility in terms of bringing monthly revenue to some parent or something, or other foster parent. And maybe the foster parent's taking on multiple children and they just can't continue with it, right? I mean, there's no fault involved with it. It's just, all right, the net result is this person has nowhere to go, knows nobody, and they're on the street. So.
Yeah. Actually, not too long ago, we just had a great lady in here who was talking about all the predatory practices that are going on with our mobile home parks. And everything like that.
Tamara Janies, is that who?
Yeah, Tamara. Yep,
okay,
thank you.
I've worked closely with Tamara,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking at some things because she was asking the board to consider an emergency ordinance to basically stop the increase of rent controls without some kind of a control. And the thing that we're looking at is trying to get data that really says that is the situation with a significant number of mobile home parks in El Dorado County. Because if it is, then it's easy to use one of the other models that have been used by Humboldt County, which is the example that Tamara provided, to try to put something in place. So I've taken that on as kind of a personal objective. I've met with our county council to talk about it. But you have to have substantiation that it's a real problem for me to want to step up and do something, because I'm a free market, free enterprise kind of person that I hate to start affecting values of things by putting things like rent control in place. Right. It should be supply and demand. So if you start altering that supply and demand curve, at some point you're talking about subsidies or something else, and then people are upset because why am I paying for somebody else to be taken care of when they made bad choices? Well, I didn't make bad choices, so why do I have to pay for them? So there's a number of things like that, but I'm encouraged that Tamara is going to collect the data, and we'll be able to show that there is substantial evidence that we do have an issue and it's growing. And if that's the case, then we can certainly bring it before the board for a discussion about whether or not we should do something like that. One of the things that happened recently at state level is that they have started rent controls in various types of communities, primarily within cities, not so much counties, but I think it eventually will be extended to counties. But the governor decided and the legislature decided they need to do something for rent controls, and I think it's primarily driven by San Francisco and Oakland and what people pay for rent over there in a little tiny squeeze yourself into the closet type of living space is just amazing. But I think what they'd seen is escalations of those rent costs to the point that they felt it was inappropriate and it was just beyond what people could pay. So they have established at the state level rent controls on things, but they didn't deal with the mobile home park type of situation, the space rental part, as opposed to an apartment rental or home rental or that sort of thing. So I'm not sure why the state didn't address that broader spectrum of all kinds of rents that are paid. But right now it's something that the counties are looking at individually, and then if there's a proper justification to do things like that, then I think we at least need to have the conversation. And that's the nice thing about the Board of Supervisors is comes down to who's going to vote for what, and it moves forward based upon that. But a lot of that's driven by public comment. What is it that the public feels is appropriate? And you have to try to weigh all of that, pluses and minuses. And the term I always use is, what is it that serves the greater good? And you can be challenged on that because it's very subjective. There's nothing that defines what it is. There's no light that goes on when you're doing the greater good. But you have to look at all of El Dorado County and all the things going on, and how does it affect the businesses? How does it affect the local residents? There's just a lot of considerations, and we make decisions, and ultimately some of them are not going to be right, but some of them are not life-ending either. There's something you can correct and adjust. We have a new cannabis ordinance that we're starting to administer, and we're starting to license the dispensaries in particular. And so we're going to see, I'm sure, a lot of adjustments that have to be made in that as time goes on, because we took best practices from a lot of different counties. We incorporated them into our ordinances, but based upon the vote people took, we basically are a full breadth of cannabis services, the manufacturing, the growing, the testing labs, the dispensaries, the whole spectrum of things we've dealt with. So,
honestly, in my opinion, I think that the vote that we did, most people I talked to didn't know what they were voting for. Like they thought they were voting for something differently. And I mean, it's just my 2 cents on that one.
I've heard that.
Hi, my name is Jeff Gutierrez, one of the owners of True Value Hardware on Missouri Flat Road. My parents are the original owners and bought the store 36 years ago. I grew up in the business and had my first day at 12 years old. The first customer I went up and asked for help, he said, "Yeah, go get someone older." I still get that response today, but now it's a compliment. Steel and John Deere are rated the best in their respective industries. And here at True Value, we have the benefit of carrying and being the local dealers for both of those products. I've always looked at being a salesman as you got to love what you sell. If you love what you sell, it's not gonna feel like it's a job. You're just getting the right equipment for the customer. The great thing about our store is you can do everything through the store here. We have a repair shop, we have rentals. If you don't know how to use it, we go over everything when you rent the product. I myself am a new homeowner, so I am getting an idea of everything that I need for home renovations. Everybody's got a different job, and we want to be a part of that job and help them through that job. It's very important for us to have a happy staff. Our staff is an extension of us. We support a lot of families through this business, and that's what I love. I love it when a customer comes in and says, "Hey Jeff, I need this," or "Hey Brian, I need this." It kind of warms my heart to know that our store has such a footprint in the community. We try to support our community in many different ways, and one of those ways is through donations. We definitely help out all of the local schools. We support Relay for Life, local youth sports, Eagle Scouts, Toys for Tots, many different organizations. It's important for us to be a part of the community and to really make an impact in people's lives.
Placerville True Value is located at 4571 Missouri Flat Road and can be reached at 530-622-0992 or truevalue.com/Placerville.
I've also heard that people felt that the only way they were going to get the enforcement to stop the illegal grows is by making it legal. Because then you have to be licensed, you have to have control elements in place, you have to pay fees and taxes, and they felt by making it required to do that through the state of California and through the local entities, the county or the city, that you'll have a much better result because you won't have all of the drug trafficking and the illegal things going on and neighbors complaining about neighbors because there's an ordinance that says you have to have certain setbacks that to prevent odor from one property to another property, because that's one of the biggest complaints we get. So I've heard that argument, that they felt that things have gotten so bad in some of the rural areas that the only thing you can do to protect yourself is to make it legal and then hope the enforcement follows up with the way they're supposed to, and makes it better from a quality of life perspective than what people have had in the past. So there's a lot of different, I think, opinions on why the vote went through. I was surprised personally. I didn't think El Dorado County, being as conservative as it typically is, would go that direction. But the voters voted, and we've responded, and so we're trying to make the best of that. The other major thing we've had, it's a major change, is our vacation home rental ordinance.
Oh, right.
because we've had a lot of issues. It really stirred with South Lake Tahoe and some of the things they have. The city of South Lake Tahoe changed their ordinance, and that created a lot of problems. But we've been trying to work with a lot of people who have the vacation home rentals and try to understand what it is that's the problem. And for the most part, it's invasion into neighborhoods. Wherein when somebody bought a piece of property 25 years ago, there was one vacation home rental on the street, right? But over time, people sell those properties. They're purchased as an investment property. And I've been told that there's some areas in the city of South Lake Tahoe in particular where you have half the houses in the neighborhood of maybe 50 homes that are vacation home rentals, because there's more money in it from an investment perspective than actually buying the home to live there. And when you look at what happened with the economy of South Lake Tahoe when the Indian Gaming Casino went in Shingle Springs, that short-circuited a lot of the tourists and the gamblers that used to go to South Lake Tahoe and frequent the places, and created a stronger economy with the money that was coming in sales tax. And so a lot of that has really dropped off in the last 10 to 15 years, and that makes it difficult for people to afford to living in South Lake Tahoe. So I know we had to hire some new probation officers to help us with the juvenile hall facility, juvenile treatment center that's up in South Lake Tahoe.
Oh, right. Yeah,
And
ours down in Placerville closed down.
We closed it because we couldn't continue to afford to run two facilities. The plan is eventually to move everybody back to Placerville and shut down the Tahoe one and do a repurposing of the Tahoe facility to some other use. But there's nothing that's absolutely cast in concrete right now. That's kind of the plan, but it could change. But I was talking with a new probation officers up there that she was recently hired, and she couldn't afford to live in the South Lake Tahoe basin, so she was living over the hill in Gardnerville. And she was commuting from Gardnerville to work every day, which is probably about a 20-mile commute, something like that, maybe 25 miles, but it's 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And then you think about going up and down the grade, and snowy weather conditions, and your travel time gets a lot longer. But a lot of the contractor labor force in South Lake Tahoe used to be able to afford to live in Lake Tahoe, can't anymore. So a lot of the contractors, the actual laborers for the contractors that are in Tahoe, are coming from residences in Nevada. So we've kind of ended up with a mixed economy, and Sue Novosel is the expert in all that stuff. I'm not, but there's certain things that I've observed and kind of learned, and it's just kind of interesting the way things happen when you end up with something like an Indian Gaming Casino, which totally changes traffic flows, and not so much tourism, because the tourism attraction of Tahoe is still there. There's people worldwide that want to come visit Lake Tahoe for the beauty and the majesty of Lake Tahoe. I mean, those things are good. And then there's the skiers that want to come. And there was recently a film made up in part, at least, that was done in Lake Tahoe that's going to be coming out, I guess, this summer, that everybody's going to recognize what it is, and it's going to have a lot of increase in tourism as a result of it. So there's some positive things that are happening that will help the city of South Lake Tahoe and the Myers community, which is a primary community that's in the unincorporated area. But along with that, the things like the gambling, just the casinos and stuff, they're not what they used to be because of the factor of the Shingle Springs. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's a big change from what we had. For many, many years, if you wanted to go gamble, you got on a bus or something rather than went to Tahoe. And that's all changed. So yeah, just one of those paradigm shifts that occurs, and I don't know that you plan for it, but you do have to understand how it affects things, right? What is the unintended consequences, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot of those kinds of things that happen. So
yeah, definitely something to try to keep in mind whenever we're doing stuff.
Right. How do we mitigate? That's one of the key things I'm always looking at. We have something that's going to create something different, increase in traffic or whatever, but what can we do to mitigate that by looking at reasonable accommodations, and whether it's signalization where there isn't signalization, whether it's changing the timing of signals, whether it's left turn pockets, what is it we can do to mitigate a given project, because it is definitely going to have an impact. There's no way you can add housing in El Dorado County without creating an impact somewhere. It's going to happen, right? But fortunately, with Measure Y that passed many, many years ago, we have provisions in there that don't allow the county to approve projects that exceed a certain traffic levels. Level of service is what it's called, LOSF. And so one of the things I'm proud of is I was part of the original Measure Y committee.
Oh, yeah?
That was formed to really look at what we could do, and there was a couple of actual efforts before Measure Y. One was called the Water and Traffic Initiative. But of the people who were involved with that, there's probably a small handful of us that are surviving members, because a lot of the people have passed and, or they moved out of the area, one of the two. But that was a major change, in my opinion, to what was going to be rampant growth, rampant uncontrolled growth in El Dorado County, and Measure Y really put a stop to that. Because it said, if you're going to propose something that's going to impact the traffic levels on our roadways, you can't unless you're going to mitigate it by widening the roads, increasing capacity, doing something from the standpoint of circulation. So that's mitigated that you never exceed the level of service F. That said, there's a provision in the general plan that identifies all of those existing level of service F areas at the time the general plan was approved. So it was recognized that some of the areas had already grown to level of service F, and there was no way easily to force somebody to change that, so they're allowed to stay at level of service F until something can be done ultimately to try to improve it. So I mean, there's areas like Missouri Flat Road that, some segments of that off of Pleasant Valley Road, I think it is, not Missouri Flat per se, but so there are areas that are designated. There's a table actually in the general plan that identifies those LOSF, that the goal is to try to get them to an LOSE or less, but there's no requirement to do that because they've already exceeded the standard. So I mean, it was in interesting times that when that general plan was approved in 2004 was the time frame where it finally had a voter approval. There was a lot of pluses and minuses, and people were upset about certain things. Nobody was happy, I guess, is the bottom line. But it gave us a foundation for the general plan that we're using today with revisions. I mean, one of the nice things is the county is allowed to modify the general plan 4 times a year by state law. Typically, we'll have 1 or 2 modifications, but we have done as many as 4 modifications in a given year. But we try to bundle whatever those changes are. So we'll take 2 or 3 of them from different aspects of things and put them together, and then propose the general plan amendment. So it's evolving, right? It's always changing.
Now, if someone's interested in learning more about you or get involved in your campaign, stuff like that, where can they go?
My website is probably the first stop. It's www.hidahl and then the number 4 SUPE.com.
Okay.
And I do have a web page on the El Dorado County system that's got a lot of good information on it for people that are primarily residents of El Dorado Hills, but a lot of the press releases that are out there, a lot of local meetings that are conducted. We have an area called Happenings, which are the things that are going on in El Dorado Hills. It's tied to the strategic plan with the elements of the strategic plan. We talk about the local group that I formed, which is called the Community Council, the El Dorado Hills Community Council. And that was a group that had been ongoing since like 1983, and I was involved with the original El Dorado Hills Community Council, and that got started because there was a need to really, and Sam Bradley kind of got it going. He wanted someone who would be, he wanted a group of people who could be a sounding board for initiatives. He wanted to see what the El Dorado Hills area wanted to have, because Sam didn't live in El Dorado Hills. District 1 was much smaller in the day, and District 1 has shrunk every time we've had a new census and a redistricting, because that's where the growth is, right? So those kinds of things change. But anyway, the community council is focused around the strategic plan. So I have a leader of each of the 5 elements of the strategic plan we talked about. And then we've added in APAC, which is our El Dorado Hills Area Planning Advisory Committee. That started, I believe it was in 1981. I was a founding member of that as well. So again, my involvement with the fire department and all these other organizations and groups gives me a lot of background and history of where El Dorado Hills started, where we are. One of the proudest things, one of the things I guess I'm proudest of is the El Dorado Hills Fire Department, having been on the board for 33 years, what our fire department has grown to be, because it was basically an all-volunteer with a chief fire department in the early days, and now it's a full-functioning, full-service fire department that I think is the best in El Dorado County and rivals what they have in the city of Folsom, even though we don't have all the revenues that the city of Folsom has. We still have a very, very good fire department, and response times are great. So, great group of people, and with the auto aids and mutual aids, we end up serving a lot of other parts of El Dorado County in terms of either first responder or backups. We have an agreement with, the fire department has an agreement with Rescue to try to help their training purposes and that sort of thing. And ultimately, they've talked about possibly an annexation to rescue. That may or may not happen. The fire department did annex Latrobe. I was on the board when we did that. But one of the things that, if you go around to the 4 fire stations that are the center part of El Dorado Hills, Station 84, Station 85, Station 86, Station 87, they have a plaque on each one of those fire stations that talks about who was on the board when either the station was built or was remodeled the last time. My name is on every one of them. So when you serve 33 years, you get to see a lot of things that happen. And I'm proud of that, because I think, without people dedicated to try to make sure the service levels are always improved and balance the budgets and all that, then you don't get that in a normal community without somebody paying attention to it. And so we've been very successful in that. But anyway.
Awesome. So, to kind of close us out here.
Sure.
I feel like everything you've been saying has been awesome points for, why someone should vote for you. But if you can kind of sum it up for us, like why someone's in District 1, why should they vote for John Hidahl?
It's really the history I have of the community and all the things I've done to better the community. And I can't say that everything we've done is right, because you always learn from things and you try to go back and correct the mistakes you've made. But it's the involvement, the engagement, and just the concern I have for the community that it really does prosper, that we have quality of life retention where we can. So the 3 goals that I established in my last campaign, I've been able to satisfactorily, in my opinion, meet all of those. One was the structurally balanced budget. In the last 3 years, we've always had a structurally balanced budget. The second one was retention of open space, and there's been no loss of open space in the 3 years that I've been on the board. And the third one was more diversity and choices in senior housing. And we've accomplished that through any number of things. Some of them are memory care, some are assisted living. The Oakmont facility that went into El Dorado Hills recently is really an assisted living type facility, but they do have a limited number of memory care. The Pavilions that's off of Green Valley Road is a memory care facility. There's another memory care facility that's being proposed. Actually, they've been approved. They just haven't started construction. They'll probably start construction probably early summer this year. That's off of White Rock Road. So we're seeing a number of those things that are more senior housing choices, and then the Lennar with the age-restricted housing. So I think that has been a success from the standpoint of a lot of seniors want to make sure they have a comfortable place to live. The part we haven't been able to address as much is the seniors on a limited income. And that's, again, where this affordable housing thing comes in. And I'm very interested in trying to make sure we do that, the affordable housing piece, in the right locations with the minimum impacts to help the seniors have a place to go when they don't have a lot of choices that, because of the financial means that they have to live. So they probably will end up living in an apartment. It might be, 600, 700 square feet, whatever it may be. But if it's a comfortable place and there's other seniors there and they have a social life associated with it, and you have transit buses and that sort of thing that can get you from where they live to town center, because the town center is kind of the centerpiece of that, for whatever they may need. The grocery store is there, the drugstore is right around the corner basically, all the restaurants, all the other shops that are there. So that's the kind of thing that does it. But it's really, it's my history, the 41 years I've been in El Dorado Hills, and all the things that I put into the community. And I'd just like to kind of finish out the last of my days of service, because being a county employee or being a county, it's really a service organization. It's not about trying to force people to do something they don't want to do. It's about how do you provide the services and yet meet the mandates that are given to us by the state of California. And so I think I have an extremely broad background in that and a lot of knowledge of things that's happened. And again, I've learned from my mistakes, and I think that's one of the things that we always try to do. I'm very analytical, so I'm data driven. I try to set emotions aside and just say, well, what are the facts telling me? Where do I get to the data? And then I'm also very driven by best practices. What are other organizations or agencies doing? And in that regard, we just received 2 awards from CSAC this year. El Dorado County did. One was for our Sheriff's Hot Team. Very proud of the sheriff's accomplishment with that. Yeah. And the other was our First 5 Hubs program that we have, where we're doing a lot of outreach and training. And I've again,
what's First 5?
First 5 is basically the first 5 years of your life, or where you set the patterns of what you will be when you grow up, basically. So it's trying to make sure that the experiences people have in those first 5 years are important. But what we're using is a hub system, which is all of our El Dorado County libraries. And so there's a hub in each district. And so El Dorado Hills Library is our District 1 hub. And then there's a lot of services provided through various nurses that come in and can do assessments on kids if they're healthy or not healthy. There's some mental health assessments we can do through the hub. So it's been just a great program. But they won an award as a best practices all across the state of California. So those two were very significant. To my knowledge, it's the first time El Dorado County has won awards. So that tells you we are stepping up our game, and we're on the right pattern. Yeah, exactly. So I just like to continue doing that because there's a lot of change happening in El Dorado County, a lot of cultural change, which I think needs to happen, making El Dorado County more business-like from the standpoint of understanding the customer service part of things, and then the fact that we have to be using technology to the best of our ability to minimize the amount of effort it takes for people to put together things. So buy the correct software for implementation. We've purchased a number of new software sets which are now being implemented, and they're starting to see some real traction in terms of reducing our costs and some efficiencies. It takes a while for those things to happen, but I had a background in doing all that. When I worked at Aerojet, we did an enterprise resource planning function, so I have a lot of, I think, experience that's germane to what we're trying to do, and in my opinion, that's make the county operations, the public agency, more like private practice. Accountability, goals. We've been successful in establishing dashboards in some number of different areas to monitor where we are. We have 360 reviews now that have been put in place over the last 3 years, largely at my pushing to try to do something like that, where there's actually peer evaluations, there's subordinate evaluations, so every one of the appointed department heads gets a reading on how they're doing. And then we talk about goals for the next year. So it's really moving more towards a private enterprise that's striving for success and grooming the right kind of talent and continuous improvement, as opposed to, I've been in a job for 20 years, I'm going to be here another 3 years until I retire, so I'm just going to sit back and cruise, right? No. It's really not the purpose of the last 3 years of your career or whatever. So anyway, but those are all the contributing factors that go into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty deep and wide both provision. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like it's been a great
Thank you for hosting this. Yeah, it was a great conversation. I'd love to come back and do it again sometime. And best of luck to you and the enterprise here to keep that going, because I think local television coverage and stuff is something we need. And we don't have a lot of that. And I don't subscribe to Comcast because they have a better choice where I am. Is everybody has choices, right? You can use the satellite dishes and stuff, and this or that or the other thing. But I do try to get opportunity to see things on YouTube as much as I can. Do you guys broadcast any of this on YouTube?
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Yeah, guess what, everybody? You can also find us on YouTube.
So here's an advertisement, right? But yeah, that's the way I think you can communicate with people universally anymore. I mean, there's all those software tools out there that really do open up a broad spectrum of access for people and able to stay more in touch and informed of what's going on. So look forward to our 2020 census. That's one of the things that's going to happen here, because with every census you have to do a redistricting. So we're now talking about how do we want to do it. The last one was kind of led by the surveyor's office in terms of what is the mapping that makes sense based upon population density and those kinds of things. So census is going to be starting up, it's starting up now, and I think it's April. We should be starting to get some of the results back. And so we'll have that as a next work piece in terms of how do we define the alternatives for redistricting, and then go forward with setting those boundaries. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting. Okay. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. This is John Hidahl. He's running for District 1 Supervisor here in El Dorado County. And this has been Liberty and EDC. You can check us out on Comcast Channel 7 up here in El Dorado County, and we're also on youtube.com/Foothill7TV. And we also have podcasts out now as well, so look for us on your favorite podcatcher, and you can see some of our original programming on there as well. And we'll see you guys next time.